I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about dealing with losses. In metaphysical New Thought philosophy, we know that we live in our minds and not in the world, so the way that our minds operate when we deal with circumstances and situation determines the quality of our life. And the way that we deal with loss is really tremendously important to our daily life, isn't it, Iris?
Yes, it certainly is, because we deal with loss in various aspects of life, and not only in the death of those we love and care for or are dependent upon or various other circumstances, but we deal with loss throughout our lives in losing various aspects of living, don't we?
We do. And, so often we think negatively about loss because we think that if we have certain things, or if we have relationships, or if we have jobs, or we have money, or we have positions, or we have possessions, that those things are important to hold on to. But the fact is that I think we need to understand that loss is a part of life and that we continue to move through change and challenge in our daily lives. And those changes and challenges sometimes create losses for us. And we need to really expect the fact that we're going to have certain losses in our lives.
Yes, and if we do expect it, then it doesn't come as a big shock. And we can also then realize and understand that very often change brings something much better. We think this job we have is the best job in the whole world, or we're so dependent upon it that we think we're going to starve if we don't have it. But on the other hand, very often we go on to something much better. And it's dependent, I think, a great deal on our attitude, because if our attitude is, yes, something is better for me out there, then we find it. But if we just grow so despondent and be in a slough of despondency, then we can't see the good that is available for us. And that's true in losses of any measure. And very often we think that we can't go on after losing someone we love, or a job, or whatever, or home. But our faith is justified. If we have faith that something better is coming to us, then our faith is always justified.
It is, and just as you said, it has a great deal to do with how we think about life and how we think about the experiences through which we move. And I think it's important for us to understand that none of us are going to get through life without having some difficulties. And for most of us, difficulties are going to be quite a common thing. And so the better we can be at dealing with difficulties and challenges, the better that we can be with dealing with loss and in looking at it in as positive a way. And one of the things I think is important to say is that we're not talking about having a Pollyanna kind of an attitude that just is thrilled with loss. But the fact is that when there's a loss in our lives, we have a choice in terms of how it is we're going to think about that loss. And for so many of us, and going back to the issue of a job, for instance, for so many of us, we have such insecurity and we have so many difficulties and problems with our own self-esteem and the sense of value that we have as persons that we believe that this is the only job that we can have. And just as you said a few minutes ago, it's a painful thing to lose a job. It's a painful thing to be eliminated from a position or a place where you really want to be. But the fact is that when that happens, or if that happens, and it happens to most of us from time to time in our lives, that when that happens, it does create an opportunity for us to understand this is what's happened. This job is over. This is done now. And we ought not to be really orchestrating a funeral any longer than we need to. And the fact is that we may feel insecure, we may feel concerned about our family and our security, but the fact is, just as you said, that we have the opportunity of getting another job, potentially a better job, and we need to move on with our lives from where we are in a place where we have hurt and pain to a place where we want to be, which is a place of peace and tranquility. And so as we move through the loss of, for instance, a job, we need to be aware of the fact that there is another job, that there's another opportunity, and we need to look at ways in which we can be guided and directed to the right job in the right place that's right for us.
Right. And to look forward to that with anticipation instead of dread or too much sadness for what's behind us. And the same is true with aging. There's a lot written today about aging, but a lot of people just are grief-stricken if they think they're losing their youth, if they think something is happening in their bodies. Well, our bodies are all going to age if we live, and then we're all going to face changes in our lives, in the way we look. And so all we can do, I mean, the best thing to do is just make the best of what we have as we go along through life, and don't try to, like some women are inclined to look too frivolous. As they grow older, they try to be too frivolous or wear too much makeup or do something with their hair which is not really becoming because they're trying to regain their lost youth. And I wouldn't be critical of those people. I would just say they might do well to just accentuate what they are at this moment, and to dress according to their to dress in an ageless way.
It's a very important aspect. I'm thinking of a plastic surgeon that I know well, and we've done some work with some of his patients, and he has a very positive view of plastic surgery. And of course, today there's a lot of plastic surgery and a lot of procedures, and we're not endorsing those. We're not suggesting that people go out and do that. But his philosophy, when he shares with his patients, is that a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old wants to look like a vibrant, healthy 60 or 50 or 40-year-old. They don't. The idea is not to look like a 20-year-old when we're 40 or a 40-year-old when we're 60. And so what that goes to the heart of is understanding and realizing that life is a changing process. And when we talk about the loss of our youth or the loss of our physical presence and the appearance that we've had in the past, we need to understand that those things are changing, just like our job is changing, just like our relationships are changing, just like the world is changing. And what we want to be is the best that we can be where we are in life. And part of that process is to have a very positive outlook at letting things progress as they naturally do. And so from the standpoint of our personal appearance, all we have to do is look in the mirror every day. Every one of us are making progress. And the progress that we're making is perhaps in a direction that needs some adjustment from a mental standpoint. But this issue of loss is really difficult. It's difficult on a personal level. It's difficult in our workplace. It's difficult in relationships. And I think we ought to touch on that. And in the second half of the program, we'll spend some significant time talking about the loss of relationships and the loss of people to death and illness, which is really what we think of often when we think about losses. But the losses that we have in daily life can be solved in large portion by our looking for the good in life and being positive and affirmative about the fact that a loss that comes creates a void and opportunity for something else to take its place, and something good can take its place.
Yes, and usually does if we keep our attitude up. And also in relation to those who have died, if the grieving ones remember that person is in such a far better place, and that they very often they don't want to live longer with a diseased body. And so if they don't want to live longer with a diseased body, that's fair. And so it's not lack of love for those who they're leaving behind, but rather sparing those whom they're leaving behind.
And keeping that focus in mind. With respect to relationships, I guess one of the things we ought to point out and bring to everyone's mind is that when we're dealing with relationships, whether it's a personal relationship or of husbands and wives or significant others, or whether it's a child-parent relationship, or whether it's simply a friendship or a neighbor or a coworker, relationships are constantly changing, aren't they? Because the people are changing. And one of the things that happens in life is that our lives are just filled with change. And so often we don't know and we don't understand the changes that are taking place in other people. And I think a lot of times people and counselors and other people will encourage people to understand the other person. But I think we need to understand ourselves and understand how it is we're responding to the change in our relationship with other people, and look at ourselves before we worry about trying to second guess them. You do a fair amount of counseling, as I do, and one of the things that we find so often in marriage and relationship counseling is that people are always willing to tell us what the other person thinks or what they're doing. And the fact is that we need to focus, all of us, on the fact of how it is we are feeling and how it is we are responding to the circumstance and situation without getting into a lot of analysis on the part of somebody else. So their life is their life, and it's hard to say that when we're talking about people who are living in relationship, but the fact is that each one has their own life, don't they?
Yes, they do indeed, and very often we want them to do the person we love to do exactly what we want them to, which really takes away the spontaneity of life, and spontaneity is the very keynote of life, of a happy life. But I was thinking that there are those people who want to hang on to what's past, and it's obviously past. And if there's a lot of thought today and a lot of writing and information available about karma, and we have karmic obligations or karmic promises we've made. Some people call them sacred contracts, and some call it a blueprint for life. But whatever we call it, before there's a lot of talk, and I believe it's true, that before we come in, we plan what we're going to accomplish in that earth life. And very often we outgrow the need to be with people who push us to do what we ought to do or ought not to do. And we fulfill a karmic debt in that way. And sometimes when that's passed, then it's time to move on and do something else that we have promised to do in this life. And if we could think of it like that, we could let go, I think, of old relationships that we've outgrown, because some people hang on to relationships just because they're familiar with that circumstance and that person, not because it's so. And I can think of friends of mine who have done that, and perhaps I've done it too, unwittingly. But very often we hang on to someone and we want to confine them to our life and beside us, when we've outgrown the need and they've outgrown the need, and we both need to go into new and different experiences. And that's not saying we should end marriages or end relationships that are relatively good, but we need to honor what the other person thinks and wants, and not try and put our will on them.
Yeah, every relationship is going to end.
Yeah.
And I think just like every life is going to end as we know it. And so life in and of itself is an ever unfolding mystery. And that's an excitement that we all have in life. But I think it's important for us to understand always that these relationships that we have, the relationships, each one that we have, is going to end. The marriage that lasts for 50 or 60 or 70 years ends. It may end in death, it may end in divorce, it may end in separation, and we all end our relationships. So our relationships are really processes through which we move. And I think you touched on an important point. We certainly don't want to be talking about violating the sanctity of marriage, and we're not talking about people changing marital relationships rapidly, although there are circumstances and situations where that's appropriate. And others may argue with us, but that's our position. So when a relationship changes, you're exactly right. We need to be able to let go, and we need to be able to move on, and we need to be able to be open. And the other thing that we need to understand in relationships is that relationships change. And that's very hard. And when we think about parent-child, it's very difficult. And today we see so many children who are now caring for parents. So we have a total reversal with the aging process. And that's we could do a whole program on that. But as our roles change, we need to change with them. As our children grow from infancy into the toddler state, and into as a young child, and into teenage years, and then to an older teenager, and into an adult, we certainly need to let them go. And there are a lot of people that don't want to do that. And there are a lot of children who don't want to let go of their parents in the same way. And the other issue is staying in the present moment, which is not to want to have it the way it used to be, not to want to look upon the good old days as the way that we think things ought to be, because in fact the good old days probably weren't that great. We made them to be great in our minds and in our thoughts, because we by nature want to see good things, and we want to remember good things, most of us. And that's good, and it's wonderful. But the fact is that we do need to understand that relationships change. You know the story that I tell so often when I speak or at church and different places about the lady who came to me for counseling after a divorce. And after 3 sessions, it became clear to me, I had thought that this was a rather fresh experience, because she had related it to me as being a fresh experience. She was obviously in pain. She was obviously still hurting. And so the process of that divorce was still right there. And so as I asked her, when did you have your divorce? And she told me that it was some 10 years ago. So she was living 10 years ago as though it were today. And so that was a difficulty. That's a difficulty.
But that's often the case, and people just keep on holding on to grief, where if they would let go, they would just be infinitely much happier.
We'd like to pause at this point of the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature in your home, so that you can continue the ideas and concepts that we've been sharing with you.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through confident living.
Before the break, we were talking about relationships and getting over relationships that end. And I guess that is probably one of the most painful experiences of life, isn't it?
Yes, it obviously would be. There's some happy and humorous aspects too. I was just thinking that most people think that mothers, because they're mothers, when they become grandmothers, they're experts, and they look at those women as being experts, but they're not, because the parents are the best experts of that individual child. And I've seen it happen so often that children, that adult parents who are the children of living parents, will often look to the older ones as if they know everything. But I've seen, it's again, I think that's rather humorous, because the parents know that baby and they know what the baby needs and wants, because they're with it constantly. And that's another way that we change and grow, changing the parent-child relationship when the grandchild arrives, and allowing those parents to be the full parents and not the grandparents not trying to interfere or put their ideas in there, but just to enjoy those babies.
And dealing with relationships, as we always do, we bring the spiritual aspect into this understanding. And as we see these changing relationships, and especially as we see relationships that end and maybe have some conflict or unhappiness, in New Thought, we tell people always to see the good in everything, and we invite people to see the divine in the midst of the other person. And that's a good technique of dealing with the loss of a relationship, isn't it? Especially when there's bitterness or pain, to be able to acknowledge the divine that is within the person with whom we're ending a relationship. And that sometimes, or very often, helps to soften the negativity, but it also reminds us that we're all the same. None of us are different. Some of us may say or do things that we may feel are inappropriate or may be hurtful, but the fact is that all of us began the same as pure and wonderful little children, and different things have happened to us in our lives. And so some people, as Buckminster Fuller said, are more damaged than others. And some people who are very damaged are very hurtful to other people. So those who are hurt need to recognize that, overlook it as much as possible, and be able to see the divine in that person.
Yes, and when we do that, we are living from our soul level. And anytime we live in the soul level, and very often people do and don't even realize that's what's happening in their lives, then we are open and free to accept change, and not only for ourselves but for others, and to not get over concerned when someone else who's dear to us is making changes, or someone else for whom we're responsible are making changes, but just to allow those changes to occur in a natural, normal way, and then experience the joy of seeing the victory, because usually when people go at their own pace, that's what's best for them.
Absolutely. In the last few minutes that we have, let's talk about the loss of a loved one. That's certainly the biggest loss that we have in this human and in our spiritual experience. It's a painful time. It's a difficult time. The loss of someone whom we love to illness or death, or to watch them go in illness and then ultimately go in death, is a very, very painful thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And if we can just remember the positive aspect of it, and then I'm thinking when we're counseling, or when someone, it's not our primary grief, it's someone else's primary grief who's looking to us for help and sustenance. Well, when people come to us, if we can just encourage their faith and encourage the deep spiritual roots of their own beinghood, and it might not necessarily be our own, but whatever makes them have felt better in the past, then it's going to make them feel better now.
Right, honoring the spirituality of others. And one of the things that we talk about so often in this program is the importance of, we're not inviting anybody to change their faith, or we're not attacking anybody's belief system, but metaphysical New Thought is an all-encompassing approach to spirituality that says that spirituality is of preeminent importance in our life. And every one of us has a different faith tradition. And if we had more tolerance and understanding for other faiths, we'd certainly have a lot better world than we have right now. So what you said is just tremendously important, that if when someone has a loss, we can encourage them to draw upon their faith tradition, and we can support their faith tradition. But most importantly, that we're able to share with them the fact that there is a spiritual dimension. And the other issue is, just as you said so beautifully when we came into this discussion about death and dying and the loss of a loved one, it's a normal process. And we need to let that normal process take its normal pace and move through it. Sometimes it's a long and debilitating illness. Sometimes it's more sudden. We need to understand that there's pain, that we're going to feel grief. We need to allow ourselves to grieve and allow those around us to grieve, not deny it. And we need to work with those who are preparing for death, if they have the opportunity and want to talk about it. We need to be open to sharing with them. And then we need to move through our grieving process, and we need to deal with the loss. But we don't need to do it all at once, and we don't need to do it alone, and we need to reach out to others in order to do that. And I think an important aspect, too, is for all of us to understand that every one of us is going to lose someone we love. And for many, it doesn't happen until midlife or later. But as we get older, the more people we lose.
Yeah.
And so it's a reality that the loss of loved ones is going to visit us often, impact upon us, and we need to be aware of how it is we respond to that, because that has a tremendous impact upon how we view life.
Yes, and those of us who have friends and relatives or those in our churches and so in our lives, if we can just always remember to not fall into the "isn't it awful" and "oh, they suffered" and all the negative aspects, but to just put those aside and stress what is happening to that person on the inner planes, that they're so happy, so joyous. It's so wonderful for them, and we have proof of that. So if we can do that, then I've seen it happen in families where they're just totally grief-stricken and they think they can't go on. But if someone in their midst can just keep that attitude open for them, then it gives them something happy to cling to. And so, again, we have to help people justify their own faith, not help them to wallow in their grief.
Right. And as we help them with their faith, or with the realization and experience of their own individual faith, part of that process is just being present, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Simply being present.
Yes, just to be there and let them know I care. And part of it is to, when they talk, to guide the conversation to the goodness of God and the greatness of God, and the fact that Creator God didn't take their loved one. That was the chronological time for that one to go. And God doesn't decide when people are going or when they're not. And so if we can just gently bring in reminders like that, it's I've seen the people undergirded so strongly when they've been so despondent, it looks as if they really think they can't go on. But just having that aspect brought into their lives and into their thinking makes all the difference in the world.
And it is true that so often people will blame God or have this issue, and I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have different faith traditions, and again, we're not attacking any faith tradition, and whatever people believe, we encourage them to believe if it gives them solace and comfort and gives them strength. But the fact is that God is a constant good in our life and desires nothing but good for us. And so this aspect of our death is an issue that takes place in all of our lives, and just as you said so beautifully, it's a chronological issue. None of us are going to get out of this life alive in this physical sense. We're all going to make the transition that we call death. We're all going to experience the loss of loved ones, and we are going to be a loved one, hopefully, a loved one at the time that we go, whose passing is mourned and brings sadness. But the presence and the power of God is constant. And so God's concern for us, for you and for me and for that one and for the people who are touched by the loss, is the same always, everywhere, and never changing. It isn't that God permits anything or that God causes anything or that God brings this occasion. It is simply a chronological reality that takes place. And the reality and presence of God is the constant that runs through it. And the feeling and the light and the outflow that comes from the presence of God is love and nothing but. So we need to kind of get away from this idea that God has something to do with the fact that these things happen. And the fact is they happen.
Exactly, and I always remind those who grieve that God is love, pure love, and that that person that they're grieving for is not to be grieved for, but they're in a place of love. And also, we can remind them of the angelic kingdom and how the angels of death come and take their loved one. And it's been said that there's no love more great expressed than the angels of death when they come to take someone. And they also leave an essence of light and love on the people who are grieving. And so that's a very wonderful thing to know. And it's wonderful to know that we can attune ourselves to the angelic kingdom and to know that our loved ones is in a much better place. And when we do that, when we keep our faith and strength, then it really impacts on the lives of those people that we're dealing with, whether it's family, friends, or clients, or whoever. We owe it to humanity to try and lift humanity when any individual or group of people are grieving, and we can do that. And another thing that we want to remind everyone, that prayer is so important. Prayer goes out as light, and it finds its way to where we send it, and it's always effective, and it's always a wonderful factor in life.
So in just winding up, in dealing with losses, we need to begin by understanding that we all have losses, and we're all going to deal with them. And then we need to be cautious about how it is that our mind operates in that process.
Yes, that life is a series of choices, and that applies to how we deal with death or how we deal with any loss or change. It's a series of choices for us.
Life is always a series of choices,
Yes.
isn't it? And when we find that making choices can make us either happy or sad, can make us prosperous or lacking, can either bring us pain or bring us great joy, we want to be real aware of the fact that we need to think about that, and we need to be in the midst of where we are. Metaphysical New Thought philosophy is about the fact that you live in your mind, and that there is a spiritual reality and dimension that ties itself to your mind and to your body and to your spirit. And when mind, body, and spirit come together, good and wonderful things begin to happen. And so we hope that these concepts and ideas that we've shared with you about loss today have been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.